Hello everybody, my name is Valadam01 and after a short break, welcome back to City Skylines East of the Curtain, my former Eastern Bloc city building series. In the previous episode I have built a big university in the city and this made the residential demand go up so high, and in this episode I am going to build a suburban expansion to fix this. So let's do it. So I started the today's project by completely rebuilding the outside connection to the city because it was kinda in the way of the suburban expansion, and you could see that I also prepared the city for an even bigger transport project which would take place in a future episode. That would be the bypass highway around the city, which would be really useful once it would be completed because the trucks will just go around the city instead of driving through right in the middle of it. But anyway, in this episode I'm going to build 3 suburbs today. The first new suburb is just next to the older style Soviet housing estate that I built in episode 3. I used buildings from 2-pack for the suburb project. The first is the redecorated version of the Central European housing pack, which was originally made by PWAX, but the original ones came with absolutely zero decoration. So I just decided that I will use the Titan versions of them, where Titan just made a lot of decorations to it, and I mixed these buildings together with the ones that came from the European Suburbia DLC, and I also modified the European Suburbia houses with a lot of BOB customization. For example, replacing the default trees by the random selection via the BOB mod. And yes, I know that there is a decorated version of this European Suburbia house pack on the workshop too, but I didn't want to use that pack, the decorated versions of them, because when I used them once, I kinda didn't like them, because first, the decorations were kinda like meh and not so okay, and second, it just became too repetitive quite quickly. So I just decided that I will just go with the standard ones, the standard versions of them, which came from the European Suburbia pack and not from the workshop. And I'm also testing a new technique in this episode on how to make the building faster without zoning. I think I saw this technique at Infrastructurist, and it is working by simply tagging the buildings in find it mode that you want to use as a collection, and then just search for the tags and use the the find it random selection function to select randomly one of these from the pack which was tagged, and every time after you plop down one building you will just hit the random selection key again and continue plopping down the buildings, and this makes the whole process a lot faster than selecting every building hand by hand, and also it makes the new neighborhood a little bit less repetitive. And yes, I know that all of the suburbs in this episode turned out to be like some kind of a grid pattern, which you may think that it is only common in North America and less common in the former Eastern Bloc. But when you look at some towns of Hungary, especially in the Great Plains of Hungary, or which have been built on a somewhat flat-like terrain, you will see that it is quite common here, and I even saw these patterns used on Google Earth, even in some towns of Slovakia and Serbia and Romania. And in the previous episode, I think I have also mentioned that some areas of Prague too are built like this. And it is also depending on if the builders had to adapt to the terrain or other things like already existing town structures or protected areas like the old town or lakes and rivers. And if you compare the villages of the plains and the hillside regions, you can see the difference between the layouts, and maybe it is also depending on when the actual part of the actual town was built, because if you look at some older cities in Hungary, you can see that even they were built on a completely flat terrain like the Alfred, the town centers still follow the older, more like traditional city structure, and only the outer parts were built as grid-like pattern. And here is the second suburb of today's episode, which will be located outside of the Mid-Rise district. To be honest, I actually messed up this suburb a little bit, because you will see that some of its blocks will be in the way of the bypass highway construction in the future. And also, I'm not sure if this suburb makes any sense here, so I would definitely do some adjustments here later in the episodes, later in the future. But for now, I don't have too much to say, because I have just used the same technique with the same types of building just like in the previous suburb. So I am going to let you enjoy this time lapse, and I will be right back when I have something to tell you. You will see that my intention was to provide every suburb the basic services it needs, like education, healthcare and some commercial stores. And for commercial building, you already see that I have already built one in the previous suburb, but I have built these big general stores around the place using vanilla and King Leno buildings, mixing them together with my favorite asset, these tunnel blocks converted to procedural objects, and some skylight rooftop windows. And these general stores are very common, at least in that areas where I am often going, and if they were built during the socialism, they quite look like these ones on the screen in the video. And These are the places where the residents can get their basic services, like there can be a post office, a bank, some stores that sell food or clothes, and sometimes there is also a small restaurant located at these general stores. And I also decorated the back of these with some of these loading bays and some delivery truck props, and I'm quite satisfied how they turned out, as they look so realistic that they could have been just somewhere from the small town of the countryside. I also tried to mix some bigger buildings into the low-rise residential, trying to break up the monotonous of the grid. I used some Swiss buildings to make this from the workshop. I'm not sure if they fit well in these Central or Eastern European settings, but we have some kinda similar buildings like this in my area, so they will be kept here if I don't have to modify the whole suburb here in the future, maybe because I need to make way for the highway expansion, the highway building, but for now they are looking perfectly fine here. And this is the third suburb in this episode, the third and the last. It will be next to the unfinished island and the small retail park. You can see that I connected the suburb to both of these, and I made some roadworks here, for example a new bridge to the island over the river branch and a new entrance to the industrial estate with a big security gate. And this suburb was made a little bit different from the previous two, as because I wanted this suburb to be some kind of transition between the urban areas and the countryside. Also, this was that one suburb where I just started to experiment with what kind of building structure looks good with what type of buildings mixed together. I used here the same building pack, but the different building size trace from it. You could see the making of a new tag for them in Find It, because these buildings were not tagged and had to assign them to a tag during recording. You will also see that I also made some pairs of these 1.5 tie wide buildings to make these detached or semi-detached like houses as the part of the experiment. Well, they are actually counting as 2 tiles wide because the game only supports whole number wide lots, but the decorations make these buildings look like it is only 1.5 tile wide. But if you build 2 of them next to each other, face them in the correct direction and overlap them correctly, you will see that the decorations are actually adding up to look like 2 of these 1.5 tile wide houses were built together, creating these detached or semi-detached like houses. So this trick made it possible for me to fit 2 residential buildings in a lot for only 1, while also doubling the household count for the actual lot, making the land usage more effective. you can see that this suburb also got its own general store, and maybe this is the general store where I will just went a little bit crazy, because you can see it just, maybe it was a little bit over decorated, like you will see how many skylight props will I put down and how many loading bays will I build. Maybe it is a little bit overkill. And there is also some area that were left empty on the other side of the main road for some public transport infrastructure, because these newly built suburbs would need some public transport, and for example in the next episode this town will get a suburban railway to the downtown, and there will be also some bus network overhaul. So that empty area there is going to be the station for the suburban railway. And you may notice that on the other side of the future station I built the grid in a little bit different style, and for some lots I didn't even build houses, but I put down some growable agricultural fields and some tree orchards from the vanilla game, because I wanted to represent the transition to the countryside even more. And by the way, the further I will build from the city, the towns and villages would be smaller and smaller, and the town structures will be more often like this here. And also these fields represent some backyard gardens where maybe some fruits or vegetables are grown, or just some nice place with a lot of trees and flowers. I even tried to decorate them with some trees and some grass plants. Yes, I know that maybe I should have used some sunflower or corn or wheat plants, but it is also looking great as it turned out, so I didn't want to bother around it. And finally, this is the end of today's video. Here is some cinematic overview of the new suburban areas. If you want to see preview screenshots about the city before the next episode drops, please follow me on Twitter at welladam01. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope that I will also see you in the next episode too, where as I told you, I am going to do a complete public transport overhaul. Anyway, I was welladam01, thanks for watching me, see you later, goodbye.